I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey Lurkers, welcome to this week's episode. So how many of you have started decorating for Halloween? Personally, I managed to grab 2 posable skeletons and ordered the 8.5-foot tall witch from Lowe's this past weekend, along with some DIY projects I have going on. Anyway, who is ready for another installation of the Haunted Trail? If you're new to the podcast, The Haunted Trail is a collection of paranormal and creepy stories that I have been gathering from along the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. The Appalachian National Scenic Trail, or Appalachian Trail, or simply the AT, travels through 14 states on the East Coast, from Georgia to Maine. It's about 2,200 miles in length. The length changes here and there as new sections are added to avoid towns or road crossings. So far, we have covered Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. Those would be episodes 57, 58, 66, 73, 84, 95, 101, and 104. If you would like to listen to those, if you haven't, or to refresh your memory if you have. Also, maybe you should play those in the lottery. I don't know. We are continuing to head north, which is the way most people who hike the entire length of the trail opt to travel. Today, we're going to be covering the state of Maryland. Maryland has about 40 miles of the AT running through it. It's the state that I personally have managed to finish hiking. That and most of West Virginia, which only has 4 miles anyway. We've covered some aspects of the Haunted Trail in Maryland, specifically the cryptids known as the Snallygaster, episode 27, and the Deweyyo and the Snarly Yow in episode 47. While small, Maryland, like West Virginia, has quite a few Civil War-era sites. One site is located in the area of a small town called Burkittsville. If you're a horror movie fan, you may already recognize the name as the town famous for the Blair Witch. Just to set the record straight, in case you were unaware, the Blair Witch is not based on any known true story. Not even kind of loosely based on anything. It was fake. But that's not to say that Burkittsville is without ghosts. The town started when Henry Burkitt purchased land in 1810, and then Joshua Harley settled land next to the Burkitt farm, and then a village began sprouting up around them. The town of Burkittsville is a virtually unchanged example of an American town from the late 18th and early 19th centuries. In 1824, the first post office of the village was opened, and the town was known as Harley's Post Office, named after the first postmaster. Then in 1829, a new survey of Henry Burkitt's land was commissioned, and the town was platted and became known as Burkittsville. During the Civil War, a Union general set up headquarters for about 13,000 soldiers on Catholic Church Road, just east of Burkittsville. The Union soldiers were sent to attack some 2,000 Confederate men who were stationed on South Mountain. Unfortunately for the Union, they were basically sitting ducks for the Confederate artillery. 500 dead and wounded men were left at the base of the mountain. Most of the bodies were transported to nearby Frederick, Maryland, but some were buried there along the road. In the years following the war, some families came to claim their loved ones' remains, and some didn't. Now it's said that most of the houses in Burkittsville are haunted. Of particular note is the area of Gapland Road. There, it's said that a Confederate cannon was being moved, and it exploded while in transit, killing the men. Now, if you go there and put your car in neutral, it's said that the ghosts of the Confederate soldiers push your car up the road as though they're still moving that cannon. And if you put a coating of flour or baby powder on your car, you'll find the handprints of the soldiers. Or, so the story says. One young woman says that she and some of her friends were parked on the road at Spook Hill, and her car moved by itself. They were sitting there on the road, the car turned off and no sounds other than that of the crickets and the whirring of the other night bugs. Then she heard the sound of running feet, like several people running. The sound thundered and increased as it reached the back of the car. It was so loud that they covered their ears and the car began rolling forward. She immediately started the car, turned on the lights, and took off. I have been to Spook Hill and had intended to use a level to determine the actual slope of the road, but traffic prevented me from trying. I don't really need to be a ghost myself just yet. There's another area of Burkittsville with an odd sort of haunting, and that's the Tannery Complex. The Tannery Complex and blacksmith shop was built in 1807 and is located on the Monocacy Trail. It employed around 50 men, and it's said that General Lee had 2 ambulance wheels replaced there, and Lincoln and General McClellan ate in the building next door. After the battle there, the wounded were taken to the tannery that was serving as a field hospital. Through the years, the tannery was neglected and eventually became a ruin, and therefore became a favorite place for kids to snoop around and a location for teens to go make out. But while there, strange noises would emanate from the ruins. Those who dared to park for some necking ended up with footprints on their cars. It's said that no amount of scrubbing will remove the prints. I do have a couple of EVP for you from the town of Burkittsville. These are EVP that I haven't had time to really go back and analyze, so we're all going to listen to them now. Here is the first one. And here it is one more time for you. Here is the second EVP. And I'm going to play that one again one more time. Okay, so the next area along the trail is called Gathland State Park. This is a nice area for hikers to stop and rest. The park has actual restrooms and a water spigot to refill water bottles and lots of shade to sit and relax. Gathland State Park is named for the former estate owner, George Alfred Townsend, who was an author and war correspondent. He wrote under the name Gath during the Civil War. George Townsend acquired the 100-acre parcel of land in 1884. Before George Townsend purchased the land, it was known as Crampton's Gap, the site of the Battle of Crampton's Gap, or the Battle of Burkittsville. It was one of 3 gaps on South Mountain where the Battle of South Mountain was fought. Townsend purchased the land as a retreat and started designing buildings that would become his estate called Gapland. Yes, the estate was Gapland with a P, and the park is Gathland with a TH, just to be clear. Gapland Hall was an 11-room house that was built in 1885. Then Gapland Lodge was built, which was a stone servants' quarters. A den and library building housing a study, library, and 10 bedrooms was added in 1890. Only the foundation of that building remains. I would kill for that kind of building. I don't need 10 bedrooms. Just one. In 1895, Townsend had a mausoleum built for himself. Only the tomb is left standing, with the words, "Good Night," signed Gath, inscribed on the marble lintel. The tomb is empty. The next year, he built the War Correspondents' Memorial Arch. It was the first monument in the world dedicated to journalists killed in combat. George Townsend died in 1914 in New York City and was buried in Philadelphia. He basically died a poor man. His estate changed hands 3 times after his death before the Department of Forests acquired the property and named it a state park in 1949. The Park Service renovated Gapland Hall, and it now serves as the visitor center. As far as the history of the Battle of Crampton's Gap, it occurred September 14, 1862. The area was held by a small Confederate force that was covering the rear of McLaws' division while it attacked the Union garrison in Harper's Ferry. Union General Henry Slocum's division attacked the Confederates at Crampton's Gap. Though the Confederates sent 4 regiments to help the 1,000 already there, the Union overtook them. In total for both sides, there were 768 dead and 875 missing or captured. Now people say they hear footsteps in Gapland Hall and believe them to be George Townsend himself roaming the halls. And if there was any doubt who was haunting the property, Gath's ghost has been seen roaming the park. There are also Civil War soldiers seen walking the property, and at night the light from campfires can be seen. And speaking of Civil War soldiers, the Appalachian Trail runs along the ridge of South Mountain, and it's the only place along the entire trail corridor where the AT passes through a major Civil War battlefield. The Battle of South Mountain, also known as the Battle of Boonesboro Gap, was fought on September 14, 1862. 3 battles were fought for possession of the 3 mountain passes: Crampton's Gap, that I already mentioned, Turner's Gap, and Fox's Gap. Union General McClellan needed to pass through these gaps in his pursuit of Lee's army. By dusk, Crampton's Gap was lost to the Union Army, and Turner and Fox's Gap were precarious. Confederate General Lee ordered his men to withdraw, but not after each side totaled deaths in the hundreds. Now, the ghosts of these long-dead soldiers are still reliving that time. Cannon fire sometimes echoes through the gaps. Many people have seen the glow of a campfire, but when they get close, the fire disappears. The same thing happens when they see people dressed in Civil War-era uniforms. When they approach them, the men simply vanish. Now, I do have 2 EVPs that were recorded in the area of Crampton's Gap, and here is the first one. And I'm going to play that one more time for you. I'm going to play the second one for you. And here that is one more time. Near Fox's Gap, Daniel Wise lived on a farm with his 2 children. Fox's Gap was a focal point of the Battle of South Mountain. During the battle, he and his family fled to a nearby church, and his home was used as a makeshift hospital for the wounded. After these battles, there were plenty of dead that needed to be buried. The story is that the Union was offering $1 per body to those who would bury them. Allegedly, Mr. Wise dumped 58 Confederate bodies down a well instead of burying them in order to collect the money. There is no doubt that 58 bodies were thrown down the well, though there is uncertainty about who exactly did it. Either way, there are ghosts. In one story, the ghost of a soldier floated up to Daniel Wise's cabin one evening, saying he was uncomfortable lying face down in the well. "I have come to have you turn me over. I was the last man and you'll find me on top," the spirit told Wise. "If you don't turn me, Mr. Wise, I'll haunt you every night till you die." Wise then went to the well and removed the bodies to find that one on the bottom was in fact lying face down. The soldiers' bones were eventually removed from the well 12 years after the 1862 Battle of South Mountain and reinterred in a Civil War cemetery in Hagerstown. Historians disagree about exactly who was responsible for their original burial. Another story says that by the time the Union occupied the Gap, hundreds of dead bodies lay thick over Wise's fields. The mountain was turned into a landscape of death. Union soldiers were the ones standing victorious, but the task of burying the dead fell to them. It was hard, ugly work, made worse by the rocky ground at Fox's Gap, which made the digging especially difficult. Eventually, the Union men, disgusted and exhausted by their nightmarish detail, decided they had had enough. Eager to finish their burial detail, they gathered up the last 58 Confederate bodies and threw them into Daniel Wise's well. After they were done their grisly work, the Union soldiers finally moved on. A few days later, on September 18th, Daniel Wise and his 2 children returned to their home. The Wise family couldn't have dreamed up a more horrific sight. The fertile fields they once knew were now unrecognizable, made into a surreal harvest of devastation by the numberless Union burial mounds in Wise's field. Dead Confederates were buried in shallow trenches that were dug right up against the bullet-riddled walls of the Wise farmhouse. Death hung over the entire area, and there was no escaping the stench of rot, which was just as thick outside Daniel Wise's cabin as it was within. But the worst of it lay at the bottom of the well, where 58 dead Southerners lay decomposing. The Civil War continued on its bloody course, leaving Daniel Wise and his ruined farm to be forgotten. Yet Daniel's tale did not end there. In fact, it had just begun. As outraged as he was at the mess the Union Army left behind, Wise quickly learned that some of the dead on his farm were as unhappy with their burial arrangements as he was. With the visitation of the ghost previously mentioned, and the continuous sound of bodies being thrown and landing at the bottom of the well. It's a sound that people visiting the area claim to still hear. Down the road from Gathland State Park is an old abandoned church that was built sometime in the 1880s. There have been some claims that the church was used as a satanic church in the 1980s, and that it's haunted, but by who or what I couldn't say. Since the 1980s was the time of the Satanic Panic, I'm not certain there's much truth to that particular story. I can attest to the place having a heavy, eerie feeling, and there is a small cemetery there as well. It's hard to say if the haunting has to do with the church, or if it's still ghosts of the Civil War soldiers that lost their lives there so long ago. I do have one EVP that I was able to record at the church a few years ago. And here it is for you. I'm going to play that one here right now.
Okay. Anybody here?
And I'm going to play it one more time.
Anybody here?
Next up is the South Mountain Inn. The South Mountain Inn was founded in 1732. In 1755, General Braddock and Lieutenant George Washington marched their army past the inn on the way to battle with the French and Indians near Fort Duchesne. It served as a wagon stand and stagecoach stop. In 1859, it was held overnight as an outpost staging point of John Brown's followers. In 1862, General D.H. Hill used the building as his headquarters during the Battle of South Mountain. It was sold in 1876 to Madeline Dahlgren, and it was her private residence until 1925, when it was turned back into an inn. During the time that Madeline Dahlgren lived in the house, one of her house guests had opened the bedroom window and was dozing in the rocking chair there by the open window. She woke up to an eerie quiet and strange glow. When she looked out the window, she saw a figure 50 yards away. The glowing figure hovered over the road and was taller than a human. She slammed the shutters closed and hid under the covers. On another night, another friend noticed a strange light and looked outside. She saw the same ghostly figure. She went and got Madeline, and both women watched as the figure stretched gigantic, luminous wings. They slammed the shutters closed and together began to pray. Madeline Dahlgren died in the house in 1884, and some say she's still in the house. One night, a cleaning man stayed late in order to receive a delivery. He saw a door that's always been closed had been opened. When he went to investigate, he smelled smoke and called 911. The back of the restaurant was in flames, but the inn was spared. It's believed Madeline got the man's attention by opening the door. The owners have reported seeing a flash of something in the attic. In the 1870s, there was a negative spirit in the house until it was exorcised by a couple of female spiritualists. With the rich history of the inn, it's no wonder that people also see phantom soldiers inside and outside, doors that shake as though someone is trying to open them, and voices and footsteps in empty rooms. One time, while I was sitting outside the inn late at night, I heard something strange. Now, there at the inn, there are several spottapots that are located at the edge of the property. And while we were sitting there, one of the spottapot doors opened and slammed closed. But after investigating, there was nobody there. On a non-paranormal side note, during our adventure hiking the Appalachian Trail, my cousin and I had to stop the hike early due to injury. We met my aunt, my cousin's mother, at the end, and all of us had a meal there together. Even though we were off the trail, smelly and dirty, they treated us like we were as well dressed as their other patrons. The food was delicious. The service was excellent. I highly recommend trying to go there to eat if you're ever in the area. After South Mountain Inn, heading north, is the Washington Monument State Park. And no, it's not the Washington Monument. Washington Monument State Park is a public recreation area located about 1 mile southeast of Boonesboro, Maryland. The park preserves the Washington Monument, a 40-foot-tall tower honoring George Washington, the first president of the United States. Built in 1827, the original tower was the first monument dedicated to George Washington to be completed. The Washington Monument in Baltimore was completed 2 years later, although it had been started considerably earlier in 1815. The famous Washington Monument in the District of Columbia was not completed until 1885. This monument sits along the Appalachian Trail near the summit of South Mountain's Monument Knob. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1972. The dry-laid stone tower was built on July 4, 1827, by the citizens of Boonesboro, who marched to the site after assembling in the town square at 7 a.m. At the end of that day, the tower stood at 15 feet high on a base 54 feet in circumference. Later that year, after the busy season, workmen returned to complete the tower to a height of 30 feet. Owen Brown was the son of abolitionist John Brown and the highest-ranking surviving uncaptured member of the party assembled for John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. Owen led a party of 5 escapees from the failed raid to safety in the north. On or about the night of October 23, 1859, these men ascended the slope of South Mountain after circling around Turner's Gap to avoid the men and dogs lying in wait for them in the mountain pass. To their astonishment, there on the crest of the mountain was an odd stone tower. Owen Brown retold the experience during his only known interview in 1873. Both he and the interviewer then still apparently unaware the men had stumbled upon Washington's monument. Although it was a popular meeting place for the citizens of Boonesboro, weather and vandalism reduced the monument to rubble. In that condition, it was used by the Union Army as a signal station during the Civil War. In 1882, the Oddfellows Lodge of Boonesboro sponsored the tower's restoration. A canopy was added and a vehicle road built up the mountainside. A decade later, however, the tower again fell into ruin when a crack in the wall was not repaired. The Washington County Historical Society purchased the 1-acre site in 1920 and deeded it to the state for the use as a state park in 1934. The tower was rebuilt in its present form by members of the Civilian Conservation Corps. Allegedly, there's a system of caves found among the rocky crags below the monument. During the Civil War, it said a young soldier stopped at a farm to get a drink. There, he met the landowner's daughter, and they, of course, fell in love. She begged him to run away, far from the war. So he deserted the army, and they ran away and hid in one of the caves. As luck would have it, they were buried alive by a rock slide that cut off their way out of the caves. Late at night, distressing cries for help might be heard both at the monument site and from the valley below. It's said to be the cries of the lovers trapped under the monument in a maze of caves forever. Along the length of South Mountain, there is said to be a banshee roaming. Banshees come from Irish folklore. The name comes from the Gaelic meaning woman of the fairy mound or fairy woman. Often, banshees have long streaming hair and eyes red from crying. Their most notable feature, however, is their crying, also described as wailing, screaming, or keening, basically because they're in mourning. Think about how you might carry on at the news of a loved one's death. This is what the banshee does. They are said to be harbingers of death. The White Woman, as she is called, is a banshee that haunts South Mountain. There was a young, simple mountain girl who lived in a hut with her grandparents and her Uncle Ike. Her name was Annie. One summer day, she was looking out on the road when she saw a shrouded woman rise from the road, seeming to pass through the house. Her Uncle Ike died 2 days later. Not long after, the house burned to the ground. Another time, a grandmother sighted the banshee woman. She was caring for her 9-month-old grandchild at the time. The child's mother had recently passed away, her ghostly figure seen leaning over the baby's cradle. The baby died soon afterwards. So make sure you keep an eye or ear out for the banshee if you're camping or hiking on South Mountain. And last, but certainly not least, are the mountain imps that were spotted some time ago. An imp comes from European folklore and is a small figure similar to a fairy or demon. They're known for their pranks and mischievousness and aren't typically considered dangerous. Mostly they're just annoying little demons. Now I know why my cousin and I were referred to as imps sometimes. They're known to be short in stature and not very attractive, and they're generally lonely creatures seeking attention. Back in 1883, a group of horned, cloven-hooved, demon-like creatures that were marked all over with spots like a leopard were seen on the South Mountain Ridge by a local resident. The creatures haven't been seen since that time. Or at least there have been no reports since that time. I'm not sure people today would be so quick to admit seeing something like that. Or perhaps there have been childish pranks played on people on the trail, and no one realized who or what was behind it. And on that note, that's going to do it for this episode. Remember, you can find Lurk wherever you find your other favorite podcasts, or at lurkpodcast.com, where we have all of our episodes along with links to our social media. If you have a suggestion for a topic, please send me a message via social media or email me at lurkpodcast@yahoo.com. Remember, we have the Whitehall, New York Sasquatch Festival coming up September 30th. I will be there along with Liz from So Sci-Fi and Beyond, who will also be set up as a vendor. And I'm hoping that she and I will be able to do some recording for an episode and possibly live stream for social media, as we're planning to check out some paranormal areas of interest there. Yes, I have turned it into another paranormal vacation. Is there really any other kind of vacation? The answer is no. I even brought equipment on my honeymoon cruise because we were sailing through the Bermuda Triangle. Nothing happened. Until next time, keep lurking.